In Viking society, one word could ruin a man's life: arg. This term, meaning unmanly or morally deviant, carried such weight that it could strip someone of their honor, rights, and even condemn them to a fate worse than death. To be called arg was not just an insult. It was a serious accusation, deeply damaging to one's reputation and status. Masculinity in Viking culture was central to a person's identity, not just socially, but also legally and spiritually. Arg referred to behavior seen as the opposite of the warrior ideal. Acts like cowardice, playing passive roles in same-gender relationships, or engaging in sorcery seer, a practice typically associated with women. In fact, even the god Odin faced criticism for using seer, a practice that was considered so shameful for men that it brought dishonor. When a man was accused of being arg, it wasn't a minor issue. It was a formal legal charge known as knee. This accusation had serious consequences, including a ritual duel called holmgang to defend one's honor. Failing to respond was seen as an admission of guilt, with severe repercussions. In the 10th and 11th centuries, Viking laws, particularly in Iceland, took the accusation of arg very seriously. If the charge went uncontested, it could lead to outlawry, the harshest punishment available. This wasn't just exile, it was a death sentence. A man branded arg would lose all legal protections and could be killed without consequence by anyone. Being accused of arg didn't just ruin an individual. It could bring shame to an entire family. Relatives would distance themselves from the accused to avoid being tarnished by association. Those labeled arg were seen as morally corrupted and unfit to live alongside honorable men. Another severe punishment in Viking law was skaganger, or going into the forest. This was a form of social execution. The person sentenced to skaganger was cut off from society entirely. No kinship, no rights, and left to die in isolation. This punishment was reserved for serious offenses like manslaughter, sorcery, or being accused of arg without defending oneself. There were two levels of outlawry: Fjorbogsgar, which lasted 3 years, and skaganger, a permanent sentence. The person sentenced to skagang was exiled from all settlements. They could not seek shelter, food, or any kind of help from family or friends. They were forbidden from trading or interacting with society in any way. If they attempted to return, they could be killed with no legal consequences. A person under skaganger was completely dishonored, viewed as a ning, someone without honor. The sagas tell stories of men like Grettir Asmundarson, who was condemned to live alone in the wilderness after being declared an outlaw. His life became a slow decline as he battled isolation, harsh conditions, and a loss of self. Surviving such a punishment was rare. The Viking landscape was unforgiving: wild forests, brutal winters, and dangerous predators. But worse than the physical threats was the knowledge that such a person would be forgotten. No funeral rites, no memorials, no one to remember them. They were already dead to society before their bodies perished. In Viking culture, manhood was sacred, defined by strength, honor, and the ability to fight when necessary. But what happened to those who were branded arg or unmanly? The consequences were severe. These men were declared outlaws and cast out from society, stripped of their humanity and treated as less than men, something to be hunted. Once labeled arg, these men became utligr, outlaws. They weren't imprisoned or given a chance for rehabilitation. Instead, they were made vulnerable and exposed, marked for death by anyone. The horror of this punishment wasn't just a legal status. It was a complete removal of their rights and protection. These men had no place in society. They were like wolves in the forest, as the laws put it, nameless, unprotected, and free to be killed without consequence. In fact, killing an outlaw was often seen as a civic duty, and the killer could even claim the outlaw's property. The label arg carried even more weight. To be accused of unmanliness for actions like practicing sorcery or violating gender roles was seen as a threat to the very fabric of Norse society. Such men were viewed as dangerous to the ideal of Norse masculinity and needed to be eliminated, not just removed from society. In Viking culture, identity was tied deeply to one's family and lineage. A man's worth came from his actions and his connection to his ancestors. To be called arg was not only a social disgrace, it threatened to sever a man from his family and his heritage. Those branded arg were often erased from the family's memory. Their names were intentionally left out of genealogies and family sagas, not just due to shame, but for self-preservation. A family with a disgraced ancestor could suffer loss of honor, inheritance, and even marriage prospects. A fallen warrior's name might live on in stories and monuments, but not the Ninger, the dishonored man. He was deliberately forgotten, his legacy wiped out. Families feared that being associated with such a person could damage their future, and disown him to protect their name. This erasure from family history and memory was a fate worse than death for many. For Vikings, to be branded Arg meant not only exile or death, but also being erased from the legacy of one's own bloodline. A man who once had honor could become a ghost of his own family, forgotten, unspoken of, and mourned by no one. The Viking practice of condemning men as Arg reveals a society obsessed with policing honor through exile, outlawry, and complete oblivion. This approach to masculinity, judgment, and memory still resonates today. It echoes in modern societies where we decide who is worthy of protection and who is cast aside. What modern norms reflect this Viking fear of unmanliness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As the ancient Havamal says, cattle die and kinsmen die, and so one dies oneself. But noble name will never die, if good renown one gets. The story of the Vikings and their harsh laws surrounding honor, masculinity, and the punishment for being deemed Arg offers us much more than a glimpse into a brutal past. It's a stark reminder how societies have long been shaped by concepts of gender, honor, and belonging. The Viking world, with its unforgiving codes and intense societal pressures, reveals how deeply the fear of losing manhood could define a person's fate. But even more than that, it sheds light on how we, in the present day, are still influenced by similar forces that shape our identities, behaviors, and sense of worth. In Viking society, Arger wasn't just a personal insult. It was a profound societal judgment, one that stripped a person of their rights, their family, and their place in history. A man labeled Arg was no longer a full member of society. He was an outsider, hunted and exposed. His honor, once the foundation of his status, was gone. What's particularly chilling is that this wasn't just about being cast out physically. It was about being erased from memory. To be forgotten was a fate far worse than death. To be erased from the genealogies and sagas of your people was to truly cease to exist. This notion of honor and masculinity, however brutal, reminds us of the importance that societies place on how men, and by extension women, are expected to behave. The Vikings had a strict code of masculinity. Men were to be warriors, strong, assertive, and capable of defending their community. Anything that strayed from this ideal, anything seen as unmanly, was considered a threat to the social order itself. But the Vikings were not alone in this. Throughout history, many societies have enforced strict gender roles and punished those who didn't fit the mold. From the Greeks to the Romans, to the medieval period, and even into modern times, the consequences for stepping outside of accepted norms could be devastating. In the modern world, we may not execute people or erase their names from history for being seen as unmanly, but the pressure to conform to certain standards of masculinity and femininity is still very much alive. Think about how we treat men who fail to live up to traditional expectations of manhood, men who don't fit the mold of being tough, aggressive, or emotionally reserved. In many places, these men can still be subjected to ridicule, discrimination, or isolation. The social punishment may not be as extreme as outlawry or exile, but it's certainly still present in the way we view people who don't fit neatly into our ideas of gender roles. But the Viking practice of exile and erasure goes deeper than just a fear of unmanliness. It reveals a harsh reality that people's lives, their status, and their very identities are often tied to the approval of others. In the Viking world, if your community disapproved of you, if you were marked as dishonorable, your entire lineage could suffer. Families would disown and erase their own blood to protect themselves from the shame of association. It wasn't just the individual who suffered. It was everyone connected to them. The threat of losing one's legacy was real and was one of the most powerful tools used to maintain social order. Today, we might not erase a person's family name from history, but the idea of legacy is still significant. We still live in a world where family reputation, public image, and a perception of one's actions matter. With social media and online communities, the way we view someone can be changed in an instant. A single action, a single mistake, can lead to public shame and social exclusion. The concept of cancel culture may not be the same as Viking outlawry, but reflects similar ideas about how societies seek to punish those who step outside of accepted norms. So, why does this matter today? Why should we care about the Vikings' concept of arger and their brutal legal punishments? Because it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how we treat each other, how we enforce gender norms, and how much weight we place on honor and reputation. The Vikings lived in a world where manhood was seen as the ultimate virtue, and those who failed to live up to it were cast aside. But their story challenges us to rethink the way we define worth and honor in the modern world. It also brings to light the importance of empathy and understanding in today's society. While we may no longer live under the threat of outlawry or erasure from history, many still feel the pressure conforming to societal expectations. We need to ask ourselves, how can we support those who don't fit into traditional gender roles or who don't live up to certain expectations of masculinity or femininity? How can we create a world where people are judged for their character and actions rather than their adherence to narrow standards of behavior? In the end, the story of the Vikings and their harsh laws is a cautionary tale. It shows us what can happen when societies place too much value on rigid gender roles and the policing of honor, but it also offers an opportunity for reflection. As we continue to navigate the complexities of gender, identity, and honor in our own time, we can choose to create a world that is more inclusive, compassionate, and forgiving. We can work to build a society where people aren't defined by their ability to conform to rigid expectations, but are valued for their authenticity and character. Next time you find yourself judging someone for not fitting societal norms, think of the Vikings and their harsh judgments. Consider how far we've come and how much further we still need to go. Their story teaches us about the dangers of rigid social structures and the importance of creating a more inclusive society. Take a moment to reflect on your own views of masculinity, femininity, and honor. How do these ideas shape how you treat others? Are there ways to be more empathetic and supportive to those who don't fit traditional molds? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's discuss how to build a more compassionate world. As the Havamal reminds us, cattle die and kinsmen die, and so one dies oneself. But noble name will never die, if good renown one gets. Let's work to leave a legacy of understanding, kindness, and respect.